So sport at its best is absolutely incredible, but there are challenges that come with that. And duty care is something we've all been talking about for a number of years, and how we protect and support everybody who is in the system. So what is Sport England doing, and what work has it commissioned to tackle some of the challenges that we see?
Well, this takes me back probably 7 years when you produced the duty of care report. Following the latest athlete welfare scandal, sadly. And you made a number of recommendations in there, one of which that specifically spoke to the work that I was leading around coaching, because my task at the time was to write Sport England's first ever plan for coaching. And in there you were talking about the idea of coach registration. It always struck me as odd that, there was this, there was sort of no systematic approach that the system had around knowing what the coaching workforce looked like and what it was qualified or not qualified to do, and all of those sorts of things. So we took that quite seriously and began a process working with the team at CIMSPA to find out a little bit more around, what's the feasibility of such a thing, because there's been attempts before that had failed, and of course we were very sensitive to that. So we really did properly engage and consult and have an in-depth conversation with the sector. And I guess where we got to was everybody recognised there was a problem, but also everybody recognised that it was a really complex challenge to do something along those lines. And more importantly, they recognised that it's not just about the idea of a register and a list of names. It's got to go much further than that. It's got to have teeth. It's got to have an ability to be able to deal with problems when they arise. So if an individual is registered but acts inappropriately, what happens in that situation? And then we began to look at a second phase of that, which was, well, actually, what does it mean to effectively regulate a sector that's like ours, which is partly voluntary, partly professional, as in paid professional, and that's pretty complex in itself. And we've now got to the next stage, which I'm going to let Tara talk about in a minute, which is actually to start to look at, right, let's do the thing. So it's been quite a long journey.
It's easy to put a 2-line recommendation about do something for the coaching structure, so much harder to do it. What is CIMSPA doing?
So we've now been commissioned to look at the complex piece of work. So can we develop within 2 years a prototype coach register, a central repository of all coaches, voluntary, paid, in the community, high performance? Is that feasible? So that we can know where our coaches are. I think the complexities and some of the challenges we've seen in the past, and perhaps some resistance, have been centred around how much will it cost, what am I going to need, who's going to host it, what happens if. And actually, I think the conversation that we've been having as a sector over the last 2 years, we've kind of tackled some of those now, and it's time to just say, well, let's set up a prototype, let's understand a pilot, let's not worry about it failing. Let's work harder on it succeeding, learning during the 2-year phase what we need to learn and apply, and then continue for the next decade and for the next 30 years to improve and improve and improve the system. I think there's also been a fear that some sports believe that they'll lose their members. That's not the case, so let's dispel some myths here. I think one of the challenges, not all sports know where all of their coaches are. We rely on a huge population of volunteers that have no affiliation or relationship with their sport, paid and unpaid. So I think we've got an obligation to at least know who the workforce is, and not get too hung up on whether somebody's paid or volunteering, but also to look at actually right touch regulation to make sure that it's proportionate to the role they're undertaking. If I were a performance director taking you to your last Olympic Games, Paralympic Games, you would expect me to meet a few standards that is very different to a parent who's helping out on a Saturday morning, volunteering, with cones and oranges and the rest of it. So this conversation has been going on for quite some time now, and I think as a collaborative, as a sector, we're starting to work through some of those complex things. And I think that a central coaching registration scheme is surmountable now. And that will become a sum of our parts. But what's really important to this, Tanny, The two things I really need to get across. One is it's not a register of naughty boys and naughty girls. It's a register celebrating brilliant people, supporting and promoting great coaching practice where people are qualified or competent or safe, but they are here and we know who they are. Unfortunately, there will be incidents where people, unsavoury people that we all know about, infiltrate our sector and other sectors because of their mindset. But we now have we will, at the end of this, have a system to ensure that they cannot stay in our sector and continue to bully, harass, abuse people, bring the sector's reputation to its knees. So that's kind of where we are now. We started the work in earnest last month. We've got 2 years to develop a pilot and present it back to Sport England and UK Sport with a set of recommendations for the future.
And the sector feels like they understand it more, want to get behind it more. You know, it's a different place from where it was a couple of years ago. We've all been talking about this for a long time. How important are events like this?
This is essential because there's a cultural shift. And just talking specifically around a register, if we just develop a database of names, it will fail. The sector's governance and culture and leaning into constant improvement, etc. That's where these conversations happen. That's where that sharing of knowledge happens. That's where some of the sort of, if Sport England, if I may, Stuart, say, we are mandating an organisation to do this to the sector. There's a fear we're being done unto, we're not being consulted with. Organisations and events like this enable conversations where we say, actually, it's not as scary as you think, and we can bust the myths and we can network and share ideas and good practice. And actually you discover more, don't you, at events like this than you do in official meetings. We're talking about inclusion and equality and driving up diversity. For me, women have, abuse of women and women being overlooked in our sector for way too many years is starting to get boring. And as you know, Tanny, I'm a real champion of events like this. I'm super time.
And from my perspective, just to speak to that cultural piece as well, it's an opportunity to bring other voices into the conversation. So somebody who's speaking tomorrow, Liz Twyford from UNICEF. So we're working with UNICEF on a campaign around the experience children have in sport and physical activity to try and create cultural reappraisal. And UNICEF have been really powerful in bringing the voice of children forward, and particularly being a champion of children's rights, particularly using the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. And actually, just through this process, I've learnt an awful lot, and I'm really glad that Liz is here to speak to some of the work that we're doing together around this idea of, let's put the rights of children at the forefront. That's part of the process, because as you were speaking about earlier on, too often it becomes about the sport and the achievement, and then the human being, in this case the child, isn't part of that process and isn't thought about. So what we're now talking about with UNICEF is actually putting forward the idea that coaches, governing bodies, policymakers, we're duty bearers. And the children have rights, and those rights are inalienable. And we have a duty to uphold them on their behalf. So we can work with Tara on the infrastructure and the system, if you like, a sort of a top-down approach, but we can also work on this cultural reappraisal together, and bringing people together for events like this helps us to get the message out.
Well, thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you next year and how much has moved on.